Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the Tier 5 Soviet Premium Medium Tank, the Lend-Lease tank, the Matilda IV. Now, historically, very quickly, in terms of the Lend-Lease program in the Second World War, the one that, well, certainly the one in the UK, which is where I live, the one that gets the most attention was the Lend-Lease program from the States to Britain. There were, however, other Lend-Lease programs specifically, or in particular, to the USSR. So the Americans supplied equipment to the USSR, and so did the British. And some of the tanks that were supplied to the Soviets were the Matilda II. Now, there were plans from the Soviet end of things to possibly upgrade the firepower on the Matilda II. The Matilda II, of course, went with the 40mm gun that the British tended to use. There were plans to upgrade the firepower by mounting the 76mm gun taken from the KV-1S. And it's that Matilda with the 76mm gun that you see in World of Tanks. Generally speaking, the machine was fairly well liked and performed fairly well in operations in the Soviet Union when they were defending off against the German invasion. Anyway, what do we get in game? Well, it's a Tier 5 Premium Medium Tank. Hurrah! But of course it's a Matilda. So, 610 hit points. Now, the typical hit point pool for a Tier 5 medium tank is around the 450 mark. 610 goes to a few of the premium machines, I assume because they're considered to really need the hit point boost. It's a 28 ton tank with a 274 horsepower engine. This means that it has a power to weight ratio of slightly under 10 horsepower per ton. This does actually make this the most mobile Matilda tank in the game. There are 3 Matilda tanks in the game. There's this one, there's the British Matilda at Tier 4, and then there's the British Matilda Black Prince at Tier 5. This is the most mobile of the 3 of them, but that is not to say that it is a mobile tank. Top speed limit of 25 kilometers an hour, you can actually hit that. Traverse speeds of 35 for the hull and 35 for the turret are not actually too shabby. Bear in mind, of course, the actual traverse speed that you will see will be a combination of the stated traverse speed in the garage, the ground resistance values, the engine power, etc. So you're not always going to traverse at the listed speed, but nonetheless, they're still not too shabby considering the tank is not particularly fast. Armour on the hull, 75 on the front, 70 on the side, 55 on the rear. Turret, 75, 75, 75. Now, we'll talk about the armour in more detail in a bit, but the armour is actually pretty close to that as advertised. It's not as if these values refer to a tiny strip that's never going to see use. This is a fairly well-armoured tank, but, and I'm probably going to say this again, the armour is not as good as the Matilda, the British Matilda at Tier 4, simply because this is now at Tier 5 and you have basically the same armour layout, or a very similar armour layout. And so you're going to struggle against some targets. And that's because of the gun, but we're going to get onto that more in a little bit later. View range of 350 meters, which is not very good, let's be honest. Signal range of 570 meters, which gets the job done, which is all you can really ask of a radio. Yeah, so, I mean, this is a premium tank. Obviously, there is no grind, so let's not worry about that. Let's just jump straight into the gun. Oh dear. This is the stock gun from the KV-1, basically. 76mm, firing 16.15 rounds per minute, which is good. 0.41 dispersion at 100 meters, which is not good. 1.7 aim time, which is very good. Average damage of 110, which is pretty much standard for Tier 5 75, 76mm guns. 156 with high explosive ammo. Now we get to the bit about this gun that really sucks, the penetration. The high explosive penetration is pretty much par for the course at 38, but armor piercing penetration of 86, and even with APCR that only goes up to 102. Holy sweet Jesus, that's bad. Now, if this were on a mobile machine, you might be able to get away with that because you could flank people, shoot them in the side, shoot them in the rear, but this is a Matilda, it is anything but mobile. So that 86 and 102, they really sting. And with this gun and with this tank, you really need to know your weak spots, and even then, you can have a very frustrating time of it. So the mobility is not very good. The armor is alright. The gun is terrible. This tank does get limited matchmaking, thankfully, so unless you are an idiot and platoon up in a daft way, you will never have to fight the likes of Tigers, ISs, T-29s, or anything like that. The scariest thing you're going to be coming across are the likes of ARL-44, KV-85, a Churchill 7, and the like. Crew skills are irrelevant because if you've bought one of these things, just use whatever your Soviet medium tank crew is. Whack them in here. I mean, it's a premium vehicle. For those who don't know, part of the benefit of a premium vehicle is that you can transfer a crew into it from a machine of the same nationality and the same type without penalty. So you can effectively benefit from the ×2 experience for that crew, for their experience, twice per day. So for example, I could transfer my T-43 crew into the Matilda, not have to retrain them, and there'd be no penalty. And for a long time, this was the only premium Soviet medium tank in the game, and so that was really the appeal of this tank. If you wanted a crew trainer, you didn't have another choice. Now you do have other choices. But yeah, so don't worry about your crew skills. Equipment, I have your standard pieces of equipment. I don't remember this tank really catching fire very much, but I wouldn't really recommend spending too much on equipment because this is not the cheapest machine to run. Ammo loadout, I have 15 rounds of APCR. Even though the APCR ammo is not very good at all, you do sometimes need it above and beyond the armor-piercing ammo, and that's basically why this tank is not always particularly cheap to run. Equipment, well, I've got a rammer, vents, and a free slot. I mean, if you look at the equipment available to this tank, it's kind of limited. Camo net, kind of a waste of time. Wet ammo rack, I have not noticed any ammo rack problems, you don't need that. You might be able to make the case for a spore liner to try and shrug off artillery and those 105mm howitzers that you get at tier 5, so there is a case for that. Binos would be a way of buffing your view range, so that's not a terrible idea. Coated optics would also boost your view range, but they're expensive. You can't transfer them to other tanks without spending gold, and they only give you a 10% boost, which is not going to make your view range particularly astounding, so I wouldn't bother with them. Enhanced gun laying drive, you already have a very good aim time, so I wouldn't bother with that. Toolbox is a valid option. So I would say you want to go with rammer, vents, and then your choice of a toolbox, binocular telescopes, or a medium spore liner. They would be my recommendations for equipment. One thing I should also note about this tank is that it gets much closer to the Matilda's historical gun depression. I'll mention exactly what it is later on because I can't remember off the top of my head. But essentially, the British Matilda in the game at tier 4 has its gun depression nerfed. I assume that's for balance reasons, and I can't say I particularly blame them. In reality, the Matilda had excellent gun depression because it's a small caliber gun. There isn't much of it in the turret, and so you could just point it down a long way. I mean, look at the hull. You can just point it, down at that sort of stupid angle. So this tank does benefit from very good gun depression. So overall, what are you getting? You're getting a terrible... well, you're getting an alright tank with a terrible gun. How much will this alright tank with a terrible gun cost you? Well, if you were just to buy it from the tech tree, without it being on discount or anything like that, you're looking at 1500 gold. What will 1500 gold get you? Well, if we were to purchase premium time, 1500 gold is the equivalent of... well, 1500 gold would buy you 7 days premium with a bit to spare. Or 2,500 gold would buy you a month's premium. So you're looking at kind of the order of a week to 2 weeks premium sort of thing. Yeah, is it worth it? The problem with this tank, well, there are many problems with this tank, including the fact the gun's terrible, but from an is it worth it perspective, the problem is that now there are other tanks, premium Soviet medium tanks that are competition for this. Anyway, we'll mention a little bit about that later on. I don't think there's anything else really for me to say in the garage because there's no grind or anything like that. So let's just go and have a look at things like critical hit locations, armor layout, and all that jazz. So you can see here, if we look at the module locations and the crew locations of this tank, it's not actually too bad a story. That blue section in the middle, from the front, is roughly where your driver's sitting. So you will occasionally get your driver knocked out, as in fact you saw in the... or as you will see in one of the upcoming games. If we look at a side profile now, you can see you've got a couple of crew members in the turret, which is not a great surprise. You know, your commander, your gunner, your loader all tend to sit in the turret. So shots into the side of your turret in particular are likely to, or don't be surprised if they knock out a crew member. That red region at the back is Burn City, so that's where engine, fuel, transmission reside. And you can see the actual shots that people have at your ammo rack, which is that white location in the middle of the tank just here. It's actually quite small. That's where the ammo rack is. It's actually not a particularly easy target to hit, and it's not the most obvious location either, or a particularly big target. From the rear, I mean, it's the rear. You've got this massive section. Well, I say massive. The rear of the hull is basically made of engine and whatnot, and things that are good to shoot at. So shots into the rear of this tank are not a bad idea. Again, you've got those crew hits, crew locations that you can hit from the rear into the turret. From the other side of the tank, it's a very similar story as to the left side. You've got engine and whatnot at the rear, and you've got the ammo rack located centrally. And from above, it's the top profile. I mean, it doesn't show anything particularly interesting. So you can see the module locations on this tank. They're not too bad, actually. The only real vulnerability you notice is the occasional crew member getting knocked out. You don't tend to find that you get ammo racks that often or anything like that. So that's a positive for the tank, I guess. Here's the tank in Tank Inspector. Just before flashing up the armor profile, I just wanted to mention the ground resistance values on this tank are bad. General mobility values are bad. You know, it's slow and sluggish. That's not a massive surprise. The gun bloom values and dispersion values and things like that are actually very good, or certainly above average for a tier 5 medium tank. Again, that's perhaps not a massive surprise, because some of those values will be things like maximum bloom when moving at full speed forwards. This thing is slow, so that's going to be quite small. But really the thing I wanted to mention before flashing up the armor is the 14, yes that's right, 14 degrees of gun depression. People think the Comet has a lot at tier 7, that gets 12. The Sherman Easy 8, 12. This gets 14, which is, I think, the best gun depression of any tank above about tier 3. Some of the really low tier tanks have stupid gun depression values, but generally speaking in the higher tiers, 10 tends to be good, tends to be the best that you get, 12 is very exceptional, 14 is almost unheard of. I know this is not a high tier tank per se, but hopefully you know what I mean. Anyway, that armor. So, you can see, let's just start with, well, I was going to say the obvious. If you've got the rear of this tank, yeah, no, I'm starting with the rear, funny place, yeah, deal with it. Rear of the turret, there aren't really any weak spots per se, it's all a pretty uniform 75mm thick. If you do want to shoot it in the back of the turret, you try if possible to aim for the centre of that rear section so that you're not getting the sloping towards the edges of the turret. The rear of the hull, I guess, is 55mm thick. You're not really going to struggle to penetrate this unless you're in a very low tier tank. It is possible to angle and tank with your bum in the Matilda, and then you start getting armor values of 101, so do be a little careful of this rear section. If you get shots into the rear of the Matilda, just shoot it here. Now, this is 20mm of armor, sloped back at something like 70 degrees, but if you have a gun that is bigger than 60mm, then that 70 degrees doesn't matter. You know, you're going to get 30 effective armor on this section. So most things that you meet this in can shoot it in that region. The only guns you really want to avoid shooting in that region are if you've got a 57mm gun or smaller. So we're mainly talking about lower tiers, light tanks, some of the tier 5 medium tanks, machines such as that. If the Matilda does try and angle with your bum, bear in mind, then you've got all this side armor that can be a bit of a pain, but right here, behind the tracks, there's a section of 40mm that you can probably fairly reliably penetrate. Side of this tank, side of the turret is a uniform 75. There's not really much to say about it. Side of the hull is 70mm. Then you get 40 down here behind the tracks, but plus tracks, and that jumps up to 80 odd millimeters of armor. So this thing can side scrape relatively well. You know, you're getting 200, 150, 130 depending on where you're referring to. Do bear in mind, if a Matilda is side scraping, it has these little shoulder plates in common with some other tanks. So if you find a side scraping Matilda and you don't know what to do, those shoulder plates are going to be flattened out. So if you're in a tank with 90mm of penetration or more, 80 to 90 plus, you shouldn't have much difficulty punching through those shoulder sections at close range. From the front, your lower plate is still 75mm thick and angled back at 68 degrees, give or take, giving you quite a lot of thickness, so don't shoot that. This section is 78mm thick. It's not really weak. A sort of weak point, depending on the angle, is this. This is only 47mm thick, but it has got a good angle on it. If you're shooting down, however, you can punch straight through that. Next section up again is 75. The armour on this thing really is pretty close to advertised. 75, yeah, it's just 75, deal with it. From the front you have these shoulder sections that are 70mm thick with like 60 degrees of angling, giving them over 120mm of effective armour. If you're shooting down on this tank, you can either shoot it here, here, or these green sections, which is just the roof of this machine, and this roof is all 20mm. So if artillery gets a good shot in on you, that can be awkward, or if someone has an angle to shoot down on you, that can be awkward. But the Matilda is not a massive target, so it's not the easiest artillery target in the world to hit, despite the fact that it's relatively small. Turret armour, again, it's pretty much as advertised, 75mm, 75mm. Gun mantlet, well, there are some places that have armour behind the gun mantlet, there are some that do not. I mean, the gun mantlet has some hilarious regions, but mostly it's not that thick. If you find a Matilda is able to start using their gun depression, then this turret is going to get harder and harder to penetrate, but still not impossible to penetrate. Generally speaking, shots at the commander's cupola are a waste of time, because it's the same thickness as the front of the turret. And the front of the turret is a bigger, easier to hit location. So yeah, that's basically the armour on the Matilda. The armour's pretty good, but it's not as good as the armour on the British Matilda, simply because it's at tier 5 rather than tier 4. And so you're not going to have those, you get worse matchmaking, and so there are bigger guns shooting at you essentially, but then you do have a larger hit point pool to go with. Having talked about the armour, let's go and have a look at how this thing performs in some gameplay. Okay, this is the first game for you. This is a tier 5 game, so we are top tier, and this is of course on the Lakeville map, and I'm trying to tell people don't bother going Valley. Valley on this map sucks. Valley on most maps suck. So in this sort of matchmaking, well, I mean, in general, you have good armour, not particularly great mobility, and a pretty woeful gun, as I mentioned in the garage. Initially, on the basis that we have a few heavy tanks, you know, 2 KV-1s and a KV-220, I was thinking those guys should be able to tank the town without too much difficulty, and so I'm going to use my gun depression and see if I can get any shots on these fellows, as it looks like our Stuart is going to do a little bit of spotting. As it is, the Stuart runs into a VK 2001D, discovers that the 5-round autoloader on that tank is absolutely woeful. And 2 of our 3 heavy tanks have actually gone to the valley. And I'm not really getting a warm fuzzy about this. Really not. Still waiting to see if I can get a shot into that VK, as indeed I can. It looked like that shot might have missed, but I managed to put it in. And that VK is now wrecking. First the Stug 3, and now I don't think the Stuart is long for this world, to be honest. And then the Stuart. Hurrah! So well done to that VK. He's racked himself up 2 kills already as a tier 4 in a tier 5 game. Not too shabby. Our Panzer 1C has run straight into the enemy T-25, and then there's a light tank, and he's just on a suicide run. And there's a KV-1. Ugh. Horrible. So it looks like my decision to come over here and try and play fire support, and the enemy has a KV-1 on the central road. Holy Christ. Well, this is a tier 5 game. I mean, people do some weird things. Looks like my decision to come over here was, well, on the plus side, I'm still alive. Now, I do actually load APCR for this shot to go through the side of a KV-1's turret. Because the armor piercing is that terrible, I have bounced quite happily off KV-1 turret sides before with the armor piercing rounds. Although that is the stock turret, I don't know what the stock side turret armor is off the top of my head. Bounce that shot. That was armor piercing, so it shouldn't come as a massive surprise. And I don't really want to be facing off against a KV-1, even if it does look like he's stock, just because in order to penetrate his armor with any sort of effectiveness, I really need to load APCR, and that's expensive. So we're losing this 6-7, which is kind of sad. But there we go. We have successfully pushed through the valley, but it's cost both of our heavy tanks who were there. I ended up wasting an APCR shell on the VK, but he poked out. I mean, I wasn't going to take the time to reload. I was going to put the damage in. And we're down to 6-8. I mean, you can, however, see the excellent gun depression on this tank. I really don't have to expose much of my tank. I can use hilarious positions. I think the gun depression... Well, I mentioned the gun depression in the garage. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's the single best feature of this machine. M5 Stuart and it looks like a medium tank are trying to do some flanking around the town by the look of it. KV-1 is being rather cautious, which surprised me, but there we go. Trying to pick out his front mid plate because it's nice and flat. There we go. Nah, I should have taken the shot on the VK a bit sooner. Another one into the KV-1, and is he firing HE? Because that was 4 damage. Well, he has got a stock gun, to be fair to him. That shot bounces. And we're 4 tanks down, 5 tanks down. There's only the 3 of us left. And I bounced that round. Well, the KV-1's got the front of his tank angled now, which makes it kind of awkward. So I was just going for the sort of cheeks of the turret, because on the stock turret I know they're a little bit weak. Oh well. It didn't work. This gun is also, of course, not very accurate. So these sorts of shots are very chancy, and we take a shot in the side from the other KV-1 on the enemy team. Who, knowing my luck, is probably not stock. So we're just going to pull back now. That position is just not usable anymore. And we've also lost the valley in the end. So our team went and lost everywhere. Now you could argue that I could have been somewhere being a little bit more proactive. But I didn't really want to run into the KV-1s because this gun is so woeful. And as it turned out, I ran into one of the KV-1s, which was a problem because this gun is woeful. What are you going to do? Anyway, we load the armor piercing. And we're going to try and sell our lives as dearly as we possibly can. Panzer 38T and S35CA are going for our gorilla. So I'm going to go and try and deal with these guys because my armor piercing rounds can do it, and it would be keeping my last remaining ally alive. Artillery nails the S35, and I take it upon myself to give this Panzer a headache. One more shot to kill the Panzer, and there we go. Managing to save my gorilla ally, which is something. And then, oh no, Chiha. Okay, let's go and chase down the Chiha. Again, oh, VK. Okay, kill the VK first. Trying to concentrate on those targets that I can hurt without too much difficulty. There's kill number 2. And then we're going to chase down this Chiha. Enemy artillery nails our artillery. That artillery's on 5 kills. Well played to him. Because dealing with 2 KV-1s at once is just horrible. Dealing with 1 KV-1 is bad enough. And we ponderously head towards this Chiha. One shot into him. He's not really a threat to us, to be honest. There we go, he's dead. And now they're in our base. Eating our cookies. Our precious, precious cookies. And I am waiting for the inevitable artillery shell that will ruin my day. We do have basically all of our health left now, but that's a KV-1, and that KV-1 is not stock. That KV-1 has the 85mm gun. And I'm trying to angle my armor here, but frankly, his armor is more than a match for my gun. My armor is not more than a match for his gun. This is a very one-sided engagement. And there isn't really anything I can do to make it less one-sided. Try and take out his track there. Switch my attention to the Stewart on the basis that I can actually hurt the Stewart. Managed to track the KV-1 in place. Load. Well, that was armor piercing, but the next round is APCR. I'm trying to track this guy as well as do damage to him. Except that was actually aimed at the side armor because I'm an idiot. Lower plate. No. There's literally nothing I can do against this KV-1. And he kills me. Yeah. That's a bit sad. Oh well. Let's go and see how that game panned out. So yeah, third class mastery, 5 for effect and bruiser on that defeat. 1,256 damage, which was the highest damage on my team, but there were a couple of players on the enemy team who did more. 3 kills, 518 base experience. There were quite a few players on my team who just didn't do any damage, which is a shame because I really needed them to, because the KV-1s I just couldn't really deal with. 23 shots fired, 23 hits, 13 penetrations. That's this gun, I'm afraid. 10 hits received, 6 penetrations, 4 non-penetrations. We had a premium account at the time, so that was a 36,000 credit income. Once you take away the significant ammunition costs, bear in mind I fired quite a lot of APCR rounds and a lot of them still bounced, you're down to 2,000 credit profit. With a standard account that would have been a 10,000 credit loss. This tank does not make money and still struggles to penetrate things. The gun really is very, very bad. Let's jump into another game. Here we have another Tier 5 game, this time on the highway map. Now, quickly look at the machines that each side has got. On the previous game, the enemy team had a trio of top tier heavy tanks, a T14 and 2 KV-1s. Basically, they had hard to penetrate targets. In this game, the enemy team only has a single Tier 5 heavy tank, and that's a Churchill 1. Now, we still really need APCR to penetrate him with any reliability, but unlike shooting a KV-1 or something, you can actually reliably penetrate a Churchill 1 with the APCR on this tank by putting shots through the front of his turret. Apart from that, most of the other tanks on the enemy team shouldn't give our armor piercing shells any particular problems, and in fact 1 or 2 of them may well be vulnerable to the HE rounds. So that's a good thing. Second thing, we have 2 heavy tanks, they have 1. I'm not gonna, I mean, in a way this is a Matilda, so you could try and pretend that it's a pocket heavy tank. The problem is it doesn't have the gun for that. You want to go up against targets that you can penetrate, and that basically means trying to go to those spots that are generally infested with light and medium tanks. They also tend to be the locations... Ooh, that Panzer 1C got shut down. They also tend to be the locations where you can use the epic gun depression that this tank has. So, despite the fact that we're slow and ponderous, we're actually going to head over toward the, well, the sort of more medium E side of the map, if you will, rather than the heavy E side of the map. Hopefully you know what I meant. So there's a T46, that shot was never going to hit. Take a little bit of time to aim this one. And there we go, we're rewarded with a kill. That was 128, the average damage on this gun is 110, so that was a high damage roll. In order to finish that guy off. Marder, put a shot in, someone else finishes him off. He's one of the targets that HE might have been a good idea against, but I had armor piercing loaded at the time, I did not expect him to be that far forward. And this is where you really want this tank, feasting on low tier targets and the sides of same tier targets. Panzer IV. The reload on this gun isn't too bad. The DPM is not terrible. The problem is just get rid of that Somua. The problem is the penetration, and the accuracy is also not fantastic. So we just took a shot in the side. We don't know who from, so we do have to be a little bit careful here. But see if we can put some more shots in the side of that Panzer IV. That would be valuable. There we go. And we managed to pick up the kill. There's a T25. Maybe it was him who shot us in the side before. The damage, the amount of damage we took would have been about right, but we do bounce a shot from a similar direction. So I'm wondering if it's one of those tank destroyers working us over. And indeed, there we go, FCM. It felt like a 75mm gun, you know, something around the 110 mark. But at Tier 5, that doesn't necessarily narrow it down that much. There are quite a lot of 75mm guns. Now, this is quite a one-sided game. Look at the scoreline, it's 8-0. And you can see that, you know, we've taken a round that penetrated, but we've also bounced a round, or possibly two, I can't remember. M8A1, and there's also a Stug up there, so we need to be a little bit careful. One round into the M8. He's got the little derp gun, poor guy. We put a second round in. There's the Stug 3B. We're probably going to bounce. No, we penetrated. Good lord. Sometimes you can find that you bounce on the Stugs. I don't know what the weak spots on a Stug are, because I've never found it something I really needed to know. Usually I was either in a lower tier light tank where I can just flank and get behind them, or you have enough penetration to punch straight through anyway. But with this thing, you do actually need to know. That shot takes out my driver, and Matilda without a driver is a very painful experience indeed. We bounced that round from the T25. Now our gun sucks, but the T25's armour also sucks. That shot accidentally takes out his cover. That wasn't what I was intending to do, but there we go. And someone else picks up the kill. But we got a good amount of damage on him before he went down. Took a couple of hits in return, of course. Now at the time I was doing the T28 medium mission where you have to kill a certain number of enemy medium tanks. So I was actually trying to kill that T25 for the mission, but I didn't manage to get it done. Anyway, that was the game. It was quick, it was short, it was to the point. Let's go and have a look at the stats for it. Well, that game was at least a win, second class mastery, fire for effect, and high caliber actually, which was quite nice. 1,162 damage done, 3 kills, 825 experience. We did the most damage of anyone on either team, and got the joint highest kills of anyone on either team. Also worth mentioning, our Wolverine played a good game, so well played to him. 16 shots fired, 16 hits, 16 pens for that damage count. We got a little bit blocked by armour, a little bit of assistance damage, and because we didn't have to fire a load of APCR, and because we were actually able to generally penetrate the targets that we shot at, and because the armour-piercing ammunition on this gun is cheap, we made a 40,000 credit profit. Even with a standard account, that would have been 26,000 credit profit. So you can have games that make a good amount of money, but you, on average, this tank just isn't capable of making a lot of money. 1,237 experience in total with our premium account. Premium vehicle up to 1,700. You know, it was a nice amount of XP to get. So, having said that, let's go and jump back into the garage just to round things off. So, verdict time. Is this a good tank? No, it's not. Out of curiosity, what are my stats in this thing? I've yet to get my ace tanker in it. 91 games played, 59% win rate, 505 average experience. I mean, that's kind of meaningless because I generally play without a premium account, so making comparisons with that is really difficult. 1.4 damage ratio, 2.57 destruction ratio. They're not actually too shabby. Spotted so many vehicles. Yeah, my stats in it are not actually terrible, to be honest. 1 Top Gun, 1 high caliber, 2 Confederates, a steel ball, 2 invaders. My stats in it aren't too bad. But this is not a good tank. This gun really lets it down. And in a lot of situations, as hopefully you've seen now in the replays, you have to fire APCR, and even then it won't do the job, and you're just throwing credits away. I mean, these your AP, 56 credits a shell. HE, 56 credits a shell. APCR, 2,500, just shy of. If you can penetrate your targets just by firing AP and HE, you will make money, a lot of money on this tank. If you have to start firing APCR, you will not make so much money. If that APCR then fails to penetrate, and it will a lot, you may well even lose money. This tank does not make cash. It can be used to train your medium tank crew, but there are now other options. There's the T-3485M, although I've heard that's also pretty bad. There's the, if you want a tier 8, there's the T-54 Mod 1, which would do the job. There's, at some point, apparently going to be a T-4485 at tier 7. And of course, well, at the time of recording this, Wargaming on the EU server have put the Berlin Trio up for sale again, so you could buy the Rudy, which seems to be a good tank. I don't own one myself, but from what I've heard, it's a good machine. So with all that in mind, it's very difficult to recommend this tank, because it's not very good, and there is competition for the Soviet medium tank crew trainer. Why would you want to buy this? Well, I bought it because I wanted all the lend-lease tanks, basically. I can't honestly recommend it, though. because it's not very good. In fact, to be honest, the only lend-lease tank that I've really played much of so far that is still pretty good is the Churchill III. The Valentine II requires a lot of APCR ammo. The Matilda IV requires quite a lot of APCR ammo. You know, they're not particularly great machines. So yeah, I can't recommend this tank to you. I don't regret buying it, and I still play it from time to time. But I can't honestly recommend this to you for you to go out and buy. It's probably not worth it. Certainly not worth it for a beginner, because you will bounce a lot with this gun if you don't have good weak spot knowledge, and as a beginner you probably don't. So yeah, it's also a terrible investment if you refuse to fire any APCR ammo. Because there will be times when you want to fire it. KV-1s are the bane of your life, for example. It's one of the few tanks where I went to the effort to learn the weak spots of the rear armour of a KV-1, just to give you an idea of how dodgy this gun is. Anyway, there's the verdict. I don't recommend it, but if you want to buy it, go for it. It's not that expensive and you can have some fun in it. Just don't expect a good tank. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao ciao.